Where do you envision 10 years from now?
I think that the cumulative effect of the chemicals being introduced through our food stream, through our water streams, that downstream effect on families is going to be bad, very bad. Personally, for my wife and I, what started us on this whole journey, we grew up both on very conventional farms. My wife grew up on a conventional Tyson farm, so hundreds of thousands of birds in buildings that never see the sun. My background was thinking, chemicals. I can remember sitting around the kitchen table discussing the chemical input. That was our background. You have glyphosate, GMOs, you have all kinds of different agrochemicals and petrochemicals that are getting poured in, that are filtering down through what's left of the soil and then getting in the water supplies. There's no wonder you have mass incidents of all kinds of health issues, and a lot more people will be way worse. I don't think there's one big policy change that's gonna fix it. Not one big bill, not one big shift. It comes down to...
My name's Lillie. I'm a certified nutrition health coach, and on this channel, I provide the most up-to-date nutrition information and ways for you to optimize your health. This week, I went to visit my local farmer here in Missouri to see what's been new, the updates with our current food supply, and where he predicts the future of food and our health will be for all of us. Have you noticed any differences with the change of administration as far as politics or tariffs or anything impacting your farm particularly, or across the state if you know any, or even across the country, if you know anything about farmers as a whole? Are they being impacted negatively, whether it's prices or more policies or less policies or anything good or bad?
Yeah, that's a great question. In terms of the tariffs for our own farm, we've been incredibly insulated. So, which makes sense. We're a pasture-based farm. The main input for our animals is sunlight and pasture. And so because we're not dependent on chemicals or a tremendous amount of equipment or machinery, which those costs are skyrocketing, but because we're pretty insulated from that, and it's really just a matter of management and labor, and then managing our land correctly and rotating those animals across it. And we're building into a regenerative cycle where we're pulling carbon from the atmosphere, depositing it in the soil, growing more grass, which then feeds more animals. It's this wonderful cycle. Some things have gone up, but it's been very minimal. Really, probably the biggest thing has just been like the cost of labor and the need to, help people by paying our helpers more, because the cost of everything else they're experiencing is going up. That's probably been the biggest effect on us. In farming in general, conventional farming, there's definitely been a lot of challenges with the tariffs. There's been a reduction in some markets, especially with like corn and soybeans. So like conventional corn and soybean prices are really low. Input costs in terms of fertilizers, chemicals, and the equipment is staggeringly high. And so they're actually in a real pinch right now, where a lot of them are struggling to financially make it in the conventional world, in the GMO corn and soybean world. And really, it's the government subsidies that guarantee them a set price for the crop that's keeping them in the game. As without that, there would be a tremendous turnover of some nature. But as it is, the government subsidy is kind of keeping them in the game, but it's definitely putting a ton of pressure on them. It's a pressure that we're not feeling on our pasture-based farm. It was a choice on our part years ago to embrace this kind of a model, and it's just one of the benefits of having done so now years down the road.
Right. So it doesn't really matter for you who's in office or not. If RFK's, I'm going to try to make things better, it doesn't impact you that much.
I mean, I'm always a big fan of the government getting out of our way as a whole. Everything they try to fix just becomes worse. Everything they make better is cursed. It just, if they can just extricate themselves, that's just the best, in my opinion. And so, am I generally happier with this, the kind of line of thought that's coming? Absolutely. Is it great to hear RFK say those things? Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd take that a million years over somebody sitting up there and talking about how everything is completely unsafe unless it comes from a massive lab factory, and we've had that. So it does matter who's in charge. Certainly inflation and how those kinds of things happen have a big impact, on the families that we serve. And it can have an impact on the few inputs that we have on our farm. And I would take a pro-farming and agriculture at large government policy over a negative one. But I'm not a fan of ag subsidies, whether they're, I hear some people like, oh yeah, if we could just subsidize regenerative farming or incentivize that. It's like the biggest incentive would just be the government getting out of the way and not incentivizing anybody, and then let families make the decision, as opposed to them underwriting the entire conventional agriculture industry. And then people are like, well, to make it even, they should, underwrite all the regenerative farmers. Like, no. Like, just get rid of it and then let it shake out, and that would take care of most of the issues. But that's not going to happen, and so we'll just do our little part and our little farm and be tremendously thankful.
It's crazy because I think, we weren't around back in the day, but hundreds of years ago, people would just buy their food from a farmer. These grocery stores are kind of a newer thing.
Oh, absolutely. Centralizing food into a grocery store is a very novel idea. And, you can look back in time and there is some kind of idealistic look back in terms of like snapshots in history. There's truth to it was better back in the day, and then there's also untruth to that. In the rural areas, it was definitely better back in the day. I mean, you can look at the nutrient density of an apple in 1900 versus the year 2000. There's like 50 times more nutrients in an apple. Like, so you would get the same nutritive benefit from one apple in 1900 as 50 in 2000. Like, I don't know about you, I can't down 50 apples in a day,
Right.
right? And so from that side of things, it's like, okay, that's better. In the rural areas, it certainly was. Most of the families would have been receiving their food from a farm. They didn't understand necessarily like the regenerative practices that we practice now. They didn't understand how the interconnection between soil health, plant health, animal health. What they did understand is in the absence of chemical inputs and the absence of chemical fertilizers or any sort of pharmaceutical input they could put in, they had to kind of work with nature more. They didn't understand the system, but they understood they couldn't do certain things or like everything would fall off the rails. And so it was generally produced better than it is today. But at large, yeah, in the rural areas it was better. In the cities, not so much. Everything was so insanely pasteurized and preserved, and the things that they used, including formaldehyde at one point to preserve milk, which formaldehyde is like what you use to preserve like dead bodies and stuff. Like it mummifies things, but they were putting that into all kinds of canned food because they were like, wow, it never goes bad now. And it's like, well, yeah, it never goes bad. Like it is just forever preserved, and you eat that, drink that, and it preserves you. So from the city standpoint, like things were pretty bad back in the day too, because they did not understand all of the incredibly detrimental things they were using. The chemicals that are used today are still bad, but I mean, we're not drinking formaldehyde. And so there is a difference there for sure. But yeah, generally 100 years ago, farming methods were better at large, and the families in rural areas were certainly better nourished and had a lot less issues.
And even health issues for them too.
Oh yeah, way less health issues. The health issues cropping up now in like rural America are just unheard of. When you look at like historically now, like cancer rates in rural areas are now skyrocketing. It always used to be all the major health issues were concentrated in the cities. And now that's not the case. You see this massive explosion in the last 30, 40 years in rural areas. And the change is the chemical input. So you have the introduction of GMOs, you have glyphosate, all kinds of different agrochemicals and petrochemicals that are getting poured in, that are filtering down through what's left of the soil and then getting in the water supplies. And there's no wonder you have mass incidents of all kinds of health issues. And the food they're eating now, most farmers don't even eat food from their farm. They're still going to the grocery store and eating because it's so centralized and so specialized that a farm might just specialize in producing, 2,000 acres of GMO soybeans, maybe 1,000 acres of GMO corn. And so that's all they're doing. No one's like eating a big bowl of, GMO corn and soybeans with their cereal, right? And so there's no actual like edible food for humans coming off their farm. So they're still going to the grocery store and buying it from the same source, but they're getting exposed to all of those harmful chemicals, both using it every day and also coming through the water supply and just residue on everything from the soil to the dust on their farm. And that constant exposure now is bringing up a ton of health issues that were just unheard of 40 years ago in the rural America, which is terrifying and sad to see that because they don't understand it. There's a dissonance between what's happening, but we're 3 generations deep into the change from a more traditional agriculture form to now a industrialized, chemicalized form of agriculture with the GMOs. And that method of agriculture sterilizes the soil. And because of that, the transition back isn't like a 1 or 2 year process. It can be 5 or 10 years to take a sterilized field and transform it into something like what we're standing on now that's alive and vibrant and has a interconnected soil and plant web that can sustain itself. And so it's bankruptcy for most of those farmers to think of changing, even though they know that they're heading on a collision course with soil erosion and the economics of what they're doing. It's really sad. I mean, we have farmers out here that visit us once a year. We kind of do like a farmer focused tour, and there's a lot of interest in what we're doing, and a lot of farmers that just talk about like, we wish we could do this, but we couldn't make the transition.
Yeah.
And I really hurt for them, and I feel for them in that because they feel trapped financially in what they're doing and that model. And because what they've done is so sterilize the soil that they couldn't make a quick pivot. And so they feel trapped in that. It's really, really sad, actually. There's a spot we always stop at on the farm tour, which is there's a 3-way corner on the property. and we dig in the soil on our corner, and we dig on the neighbors that does conventional grazing, and then we dig on the neighbor that's got conventional GMO row crop. And we look at the soil difference. Oh yeah, like ours is like 18 inches deep and like wonderful. The row crop guy, you can only get like 4 inches deep and it's just a sterile plate. And then the conventional grazing guy is like 4 inches deep and just kind of like barely hanging on. It's like really different visual picture. It's always like one of the highlights of the tour. And I don't know if we can capture that in video or not.
Just explain like what we just did.
Yeah, so where we were at was our property line. And so right there, the road cuts apart 3 different properties. We have our farm, which is managed under regenerative grazing practices. We have our neighbor's farm right across the road, who cows are always in that field. There's no rotation. It's not regenerative management, just conventional beef cow management. Chemicals, EMOs, all the things. And then on the further side of the road was a row crop field, and that's GMO soybeans. And so that would be, Roundup, glyphosate, and chemical fertilizer. Now, if you rewind like, I don't know, 50 years, those roads weren't there. And so it would have been just a continuous field. So those roads arbitrarily split a property line. And so you have the same soil type on all 3, but different management. And so we're going to highlight now how much is different. Look, when you're looking above the ground, you can be like, oh, that doesn't look too bad maybe. But when you actually look at what's under the soil, it's pretty tremendous. So this GMO soybean here, which is really hard to actually get off without falling apart. So it's bare ground on top. And then down here, this is just compacted. There's no spacing. There's nothing. This is just a compact, dead sheet is just a medium for holding soil upright. There's one root right here. If you smell it, it smells acrid. It is full of chemicals, and I will wash my hands before I do much else. Oh. This one is our conventional grazing. The roots are really short. I cut all these with the same shovel. This is the depth that the shovel will go in each field. So this one can actually go a little deeper because he tills it periodically. This is about as deep as you can go. Your roots are only ever going to be as deep as the plants are tall on the top of the ground. And so you can see these roots are about 3 inches tall. There is a little bit of soil structure. It doesn't fall apart like that other one would. This is literally there's nothing to it. There's no structure to that at all, which is why it erodes constantly. This has some pretty anemic plants that are constantly getting grazed. They're going to have very few nutrients in them because the roots are so short, and this top area of the soil is going to be depleted. And then you get to our side of the road, and this is actually one of our worst fields. Oh, and same shovel, and you can see roots everywhere. And all these little clumps are mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria colonies that are on these roots, and they exchange carbon. The plant gives them carbon and sugar from the sun, and in exchange, these fungal and bacterial communities give the plants extra water and minerals that are locked in the soil but unavailable to the plants. And so in this scenario, you can see our plants are very tall. The roots go deeper than what we dug, but that's as deep as my shovel would go. And so you have this wonderful panoply. The ground is completely covered. You can see on top, we have this mulch layer in between all the plants. And so anytime a raindrop comes, it hits that mulch and stops, and then slowly soaks into the soil. So we capture all our rain. Here, you can see on top, there's lots of bare ground. Anytime a raindrop hits, it still erodes and just leaves. And then of course, this, anytime a raindrop hits, it's kind of like hitting concrete. It's not going anywhere. And so you lose a lot of water and soil with these two methods. With our regenerative grazing, we're capturing all of it and slowly building even more soil.
Awesome. When I was with Farmer David, the sun was beating down on us and I was getting hot and sweaty. And with the summertime coming around more, I tend to get more dehydrated. And this is where I lean into taking things like electrolytes, because we lose electrolytes through our sweat. And Element Electrolytes, who is today's video sponsor, has a new limited edition summer flavor, lemonade salt, which couldn't make me happier, because lemonade in the summertime, whew, I can just take some sparkling water or regular water and pour these electrolytes inside, and it makes for a really delicious, satisfying drink that also comes with the essential minerals sodium, potassium, and magnesium that are so critical for our nerve and heart health. They can help people who are struggling with heart palpitations, migraines, fatigue, low energy, muscle cramping, eye twitching, and overall hydration. I love that these packets have no artificial food dyes, no colorings, no high fructose corn syrup, and they're just a really clean ingredient brand for electrolytes. If you'd like to check them out and support this channel, then you can get 8 free additional packets of all of Element's different flavors with any order by using the link in the video description or by going to drinkelement.com/Lillie Kane. If you have farmers coming and visiting and then seeing, they're kind of acting, it seems like surprised, like, oh, wow, how are you doing this? But if they are third generation, second generation, fifth, I don't know how many generations back they go for farmers, but at what point did things change? Because I would have thought they, back in the day would have been doing something similar to you. So how did they get off of that?
The fundamental principles of like soil health and plant health and its interrelation with animal health and human health hasn't necessarily been like well understood, and since probably like around 1990 was kind of where the full realization of how to work with that cycle and make it continually better, and what we would call at large like regenerative agriculture. So that hasn't been known since then. A lot of those, farm families typically are many generations deep, and so they have a history of having farmed maybe more similarly to that. But really after World War II, we had all these factories that were set up to make bombs, and we needed something to do with the factories because we weren't needing so many bombs. And they found out that one of the main elements of the bombs, actually 2 of the main ones, phosphorus and nitrates, could be used as soil amendments and chemical fertilizer. And so then those were introduced at an extremely cheap rate, and basically all of the ag colleges and any sort of bulletins put out by the government to the farmers were like, hey, use this stuff, this is the way to do it, plow, expand. There was a big push because Europe was kind of starving after World War II, so farm down as many acres as you can. And it of course led to great tragedy in terms of soil erosion and that. But initially, chemical fertilizer, when you take a healthy soil and you add chemical fertilizer to it, what it does initially is it actually causes all of the soil carbon to be burned off. That releases a lot of nutrients. And so initially, first year or 2 of that kind of model, it seems amazing. The farmer's like, oh my gosh, we've never produced this much in our lives. And it didn't take very much fertilizer. This is an economic boon. Well, a few years down the road, then all of the soil carbon's gone, all the organic matter's burned off. And then it's like, well, we need more fertilizer, but it still kind of works. And the more the soil dies, the more fertilizer you need. And so you really have this transition from an earth-based farming model to a chemical-based one. And it was kind of slow, and then it sped up tremendously. And then you have in like the 1970s, you have all of a sudden the introduction of a lot of agrochemicals. So chemical weed control and ways to kill the bugs and the weeds that have become a massive issue in this new farming method, because you're sterilizing the soil, and nature abhors a vacuum, and all this bare soil, nature's trying to fill it with something. So like weeds or pestilence, something to make this chaos stop. And the solution now from the ag collegists is, oh, we've got these great chemicals that'll kill these bad things. And so then so you build a cycle where there's been multiple generations now completely disconnected from any sort of a soil-based ecological model. And so it's just completely gone. Anyone they can ask or remember farmed the way it's farmed now, or did the same basic methods in terms of high tillage, high chemical use. They might not have had the same chemicals or the same GMO seeds, but it was the same general model. And so there's just no callback. It's gone. Had this awakening and kind of seeing some of these issues happen maybe 40 years ago, then there could have actually been a callback where you could like go ask grandpa, like, how did we used to do this? But we're like 5 or 6 generations out now, and like no one even remembers the name of the grandfather that did that. And so unfortunately that knowledge has just been lost. And what's being relearned now is just kind of like tragic, because they realize just how far they've drifted and how hard it would be to make that transition. There are farms that are doing it. We have taken some land that was originally part of the family farm that we've gotten back, and it was in row crop production, and it was completely sterilized. It took us about 6 years, and we've completely transformed it. It is lush, it is alive, it is got a working ecological system, but it took a lot of effort, and us taking that financial hit for 3 or 4 years. We did it because we're looking at it from a long-term generational view. I'm looking at it from like, where will my son's sons be, or my daughter's, children be, what will that generation want or need? And so for me, it's a short-term investment, but for a lot of farmers, they're living year to year. And so they just can't even fathom making that kind of a change, even if they want to. And so they're kind of trapped into that model.
Right. So it seems like nowadays we're like all eating a pot of chemicals. And then as a result, a lot of our health have been deteriorating over time.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible for people to, or more farmers to become more regenerative agricultural based, as far as, doesn't it seem unrealistic? Could people not be, it seems like we kind of need the chemicals, especially, I think about politics and, oh, the US, we're in so much debt. And so there's the argument of like, well, just kind of like write it out, or
I want ahead, right? Yeah.
or it's going to hurt to like really make some changes. And so similarly, I'm assuming it would hurt to get farmers to get back on, traditional methods, but do people even care?
I think there's a more desire to do that now than there has been probably in the last 70 years, no doubt.
Yeah.
So I think there is impetus for that change. There's certainly more farms that are making that transition. They're figuring it out. I know a couple of them personally, and the way they did it was that they sold off like most of their land and then transition part of it. But that new transition is able to produce products for families, and they can make a livelihood on that less of a land base. But there is definitely a growing interest. The other thing that's at work is more and more families are wanting to support this kind of agriculture. They understand the benefits for their own health. There's definitely more interest. And as there's more interest, the single biggest thing each one of us can do, I don't think there's one big policy change that's going to fix it. Not one big bill, not one big shift. It comes down to each family making the decision to connect with a farmer that they can trust, that they can have confidence in how they're nourishing their family and supporting them. They're making an investment. Yes, it does cost more. There's no doubt it costs more, but they're making an investment in the health of their family. They're also making an investment in how they want the future of agriculture to be and the future of the land base to be. They're then making an investment in that farm family that is then making an investment in other families in that community. And you, over time, can build and heal. It's kind of like a snowball. At first, building a snowman, at first it starts so small and so much effort to get it rolling. But the bigger it gets, the more momentum it picks up and the easier it is. And I think it's the same way with this. Yes, it's small. It is picking up momentum. It's not going to be one big change, one big fix. It comes down to each family making that decision. And if they can really connect with a farmer that's farming this way, then they'll feel the benefits. And I think it becomes then, it's increasingly better for them, and they feel better increasingly investing in that. And it's a mutually beneficial cycle. I know personally for my wife and I, what started us on this whole journey, we grew up both on very conventional farms. And, my background was thinking, chemicals, I can remember sitting around the kitchen table discussing like putting in a conventional hog floor, which would have been like thousands of pigs on concrete, and the stench from this just horrible. It's terrible life for the pigs. We were like, well, maybe this could be a way to come back or not. I left the family farm. My parents were like, you have to leave. This can't support you. And we got married shortly after high school. My wife grew up on a conventional Tyson farm, so hundreds of thousands of birds in buildings that never see the sun. That was our background. We started farming. We got into grass farming out of an interest. I read books about people that were grazing cows and sheep on the land differently, and they were grazing it and then letting it rest and recover, and that was in healing the land and allowing them to grow more grass. And for me, it was just economics. I'm like, okay, maybe this is an opportunity. So I got into that. And we're being grass farmers, and we're not spending money on agrochemicals because they're expensive, and we were starting from nothing. And so we didn't have the money for that anyway. And I had always never liked it. We're still getting all of our food from the grocery store, just the supermarket. And our health is terrible. We're eating terrible. We want to start a family. We got married quite young with the goal of having a large family. And we were told really quickly, nope, it's not going to happen. No, we didn't have any children. And then we went to see what was going on. And they're like, you're probably never going to have a family. And the only way for you to do it is spend an enormous amount of money on these procedures. And we're like, well, we have no money to spend on those kinds of things. And so we were like just wrecked. But we had connections and other farm connections in this kind of grazing and regenerative grazing community who were talking about the health of the soil goes to the health of the plants, which goes to the animals, but it also then affects the health of the people that eat those animals. And that was kind of the light bulb moment. That disconnect had always been there, and all of a sudden it dinged. And we're like, you know what? Like, what if we radically changed the way we ate? And so that's what began our own journey. We changed the way we ate. We started eating regeneratively raised, pasture raised meats, proteins. We cut out junk food and processed food. And like a year and a half later, I'm holding our first son. And today we have 5 children. It just continued on. It's amazing. And so we lived that firsthand. And that was one of the desires for us to start a farm and offer it to other families so that they could have confidence that what they were spending their hard-earned money on and trying to nourish their families with really would make a difference, both for their own health, for the ecological future of the land that other generations will have, and that they could be confident in that investment, and likewise that could build a connection with a farmer and really have someone they can trust and ask questions about. And so that's what got us started.
And I think a lot of people would want to support a farmer and be able to meet and talk and see the person who's creating their food.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people also go, well, I don't know how to even do that. Do you know how people can? I mean, I'm familiar with how it works in Missouri.
Yeah.
But how do people find a farmer?
Word of mouth is ideal, right? You can search the internet and find a farm. One of the biggest things is to find out if they'll let you visit. If they're not going to let you visit, then that's a big red flag there. That, like, if there's no pictures, can't visit, like that's then there's probably a strong dissonance between what they say and what it is. I would say generally smaller is better, like less corporate is better. If you can just kind of get a connection with a family farm or a group that works with other family farms, I think that's probably the best way. And ideally, you build a personal relationship with them, you get to talk with them, there's some interlay, or at the very least you can talk to them on the phone or watch videos from their farm, have a connection there.
Even in New York City, you think it's possible to find?
Oh yeah, now they might be coming from, a couple hours outside of New York City, but there are absolutely farms that would serve them. And if
all
there's
over the country.
all over the country. And if there's not, there are farms that'll ship. There's been a tremendous increase in the ability to ship meats in particular. And so you can get it delivered to your house. If you can't find it really close, then there are farms that would love to do that. We do some shipping as well. We'd encourage you to find one closer, but if you can't, we'd be honored to serve you.
There's so many things changing nowadays between artificial intelligence and then the different policies, and just things are changing like crazy.
Oh yeah.
Where do you envision 5, 10 years from now? Do you think that more people will be healthier? Do we have better quality food? Like, where do you envision the future?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that a few more people will be way healthier, and a lot more people will be way worse.
And with artificial intelligence, like being able to maybe see, no.
I think the cumulative effect is going to be worse. The trajectory for the vast majority of people is they're going to continue eating whatever's on the store shelves. I think whatever's on the store shelves is, we've got some maybe reforms in some of the ingredients and stuff, but what's really coming down the pike in terms of lab-grown meats and GMO-based everything, that swath is growing. And so I think that in the cumulative effect of the chemicals being introduced through our food stream, through our water streams, I think that downstream, no pun intended, effect on families is going to be bad and very bad. Now, there is an increasing number of families that are getting a connection to a farm that is really raising food in a regenerative manner. Those families that kind of break from the norm and build that connection, and I think there will be more of them, will continue to experience the increasing health benefits of just the cumulative effect of eating that way. My wife and I talk about that all the time, growing up eating quite poorly until we were in our 20s. What is the effect for our children to grow up their entire lives being nourished, from that from the get-go? And I don't know what that cumulative effect is. I can see it on the landscape in terms of the cumulative effect on generations of animals and their health and vitality. I can see it in the cumulative effect of our soil health and our plant health. To think of where our farm could be in 15 or 20 years in terms of the nutrient density of the food coming off it is incredibly exciting. When I think on the big picture, things are a little more chilling. But in our little piece of paradise here, fed from the farm, it's tremendous.
It's always so nice to see the person who is nourishing my body. Literally 95% of my diet comes from David. If you want to check out Fed from the Farm, you'll find a link in the description, but otherwise I'll put a couple links too where you can find a local farmer in your area here in the US. Don't be silly, subscribe to Lillie, and I'll see you soon.